All right, so I'll just kind of explain a little more why I'm not thrown off by my picture not being a daguerreotype. So right here you have, this is a daguerreotype found in Missouri. This is my paper photograph. Where it was photographed is kind of unknown because it says photographic artist. So if you go to about the photograph, and again, I think these are the same guy. So I'll just scroll up here and explain real quick. So you see why everyone's looking, they're wanting to find something by Lucian Foster because of this letter. And you'll find that under the daguerreotype and its likeness. Okay, and so he talks about how he's a daguerreotype of his father, Joseph Smith III, that he thinks was by Lucian Foster. And then I also kind of counter whether or not, I mean, I'm about positive Lucian Foster did paper photography. So paper photography existed. It's patented later. But if you look here, you got like 1830s is really when Henry Fox Talbot in England is inventing this. And so he's working on this. And people are probably finding out about it too, but he doesn't patent it until like 1841. But it's so advanced that he's able to do reprints pretty much from inception. So it just took a while for people to see how advanced and how much cheaper. That was the big thing. It was a lot cheaper to do paper photographs. And it came out for quite a while. Took a few years for it to get a lot more crisp. So daguerreotypes just came out more clear and they were more expensive. So if you were Lucian Foster and say you knew how to do paper photographs, so again, this is Willard Richards. His son was like 5 years old in 1844. He doesn't even look 5 right there to me, but you can see how soft that is and that you see the grains of paper. You see that here. And then here's Willard Richards, a much later date on a daguerreotype, when they're in Utah and they have more money, you know. But if you were Lucian Foster, you could do both. Both existed. You'd want to promote daguerreotypes because you want to make some money, you know. So it was probably, you know, it was known, but it wasn't like people could really make money off of paper photography for a while until it got more popular in the 1850s. But it definitely existed. There's a book the year Joseph Smith died, pages of reprinted paper photographs called The Pencil of Nature, and I talk about that here on. So you go to About the Photograph on my website, plausiblephotograph@josephsmithjr.com. It used to be .weebly.com. I bought the domain, and all these people were looking at it, and not so much anymore, but that's okay. But if you're one of those people, it changed because I bought the URL. So J.S. Bibbins, I've been finding out some cool stuff about him. So that's what really this is about. I actually found out that I'm indirectly related to him, started doing his family history last night. And so it was done in Newark, Illinois. He died in Plano, Illinois. So scroll down here, Joseph Slocum, and his father, Reverend Elisha Bibbins, I believe. Well, I'm about 100% sure Miss Smith knew his father, but he died in Plano in 1891. Why that's significant is because Joseph Smith III and his brothers lived in Plano, ran the RLDS Church from 1866 to 1881. It's Community Christ website. That used to be the RLDS Church. Joseph Smith III is Joseph Smith's oldest son. And so this is a paper photograph, but it's also on a Carta Vista. So it has to be a reprint. This couldn't have been printed in 1844. But, you know, that threw me off when I first bought this. I just had to do all this research. And at first I was like, oh no, it's a Carta Vista. It might not be him because that's 1854. You know, but my mom's researching, I'm researching. She's like, they could reprint it, Debbie, they could reprint it. And I researched more, and of Henry Fox Talbot. And oh yeah, from the beginning, you could reprint the paper photographs. But I was still kind of hesitant, and I think I'd emailed the church history department. The first email I got back, well, it's not a daguerreotype. Only daguerreotypes existed back then. Not true. So paper photography existed. It was just cheap. You know, I would just say that. Let's just be blunt. It was cheap, but artistic. But people could do that. It did exist back then. It was bigger in England. You have a ton of members coming over from England on the boat in the 1840s. And so here you have 1845. Everything I found out about this Emma Smith and Baby David this is an 1845 photograph. I haven't found a single daguerreotype of this. It definitely was reprinted, so it had to have originally been a paper photograph. But people are thrown by that. So even if you look at the man who bought the photo album that was the oldest adopted daughter's photo album, I think is where this specific picture of Emma Smith came from. I'm sorry, but even the type of Carta Vista it's on, and see how this is kind of cut right there. I think it's really cool that, you know, Joseph Smith III, it looks so much the same, but I'm going to explain real quick here now how Emma Smith knew this guy's dad. Again, Elisha Bibbins. And so this might be kind of boring to some people, but it's just really not to me. I find it really fascinating. I just was Googling and Googling, and then got led to, so again, his father, Elisha, was a circuit preacher, so I had to research that, find out that it's just a Methodist preacher in the early 1800s. Methodism was just new back then. And if you click on this link, it takes you here. I go back. Okay, there we go. Have it open too many times. You can go to this page. You'll probably have to Control F because there's probably 20 pages worth of stuff on this one page of stuff. So if you find Joseph Bibbins, you would still need to really read up here to really understand what's going on, because there's they give a lot of detail to this story about Emma Smith, and then then you find out about Elisha Bibbins. You're like, okay, circuit rider, Methodist preacher. So the information I find in this is for sure Joseph Bibbins' father, but he was really influential in Emma Smith's life as a little girl. So he's this 20-something Methodist preacher that is teaching his congregation, and they even explained to Emma Smith, they knew Elisha Bibbins. They talked about him. This is part of her history. He influenced her in teaching her how important it was to go out into the woods and pray for answers. And so Joseph Smith also was drawn to Methodism. That's probably what he was heeding when he went out into the woods and prayed. So he also was taught by some Methodist preacher that you could get answers if you sincerely asked and talked to God. And so her doing that softened her father's heart. And so he allowed religion in her home. So it helped cultivate her spirituality and closeness to Christ and to God. And she was, of course, huge part of the restoration of the gospel. So, but she knew him. And so there's evidence of that she knew his father. And then you have the son, who is the photographic artist. He doesn't say most of his work, anything else that I found of J.S. Bibbins, it said photographer. So if I think this was his own work, I think he would have taken credit and put photographer, but he didn't. He said photographic artist. So that's even more evidence. This is a reprint. It's absolutely possible that there would be a reprint of a photograph taken in 1844, because there was of an 1845 picture of Emma Smith. Okay, because they could do reprints since the 1830s, just with paper photographs, not with daguerreotypes. So that's why it's significant, and it doesn't matter that this doesn't say Nauvoo, Illinois, and it doesn't say Lucian Foster, because he could have done this, because the back of this picture says Missouri. She didn't live in Missouri in 1845. But, why that matters, because her sons ended up there eventually in Missouri. She did travel there a lot. So you just don't totally, there's a lot of questions you have out here, but the similarities between these are really uncanny. So if you see her background here, you can tell it's a lot darker to the top. Same here. And he was a really tall man. He was like 6'2", she was 5'9". And so if he sat in the same chair, his head would have been about to there, at least. So, and then just looking at a much higher resolution of that, not daguerreotype, but a saltwater print of Emma's 1845 photo of David, you can see that there's actually texture on that wall. It's fascinating to me how advanced people were back then. We think everything was so primitive. They already had backdrops, it had only been invented a few years, but you can see this texture. And so when I looked at my picture, I always thought this was damaged. I'm like, I think I can see the same texture in the background and then the same darkness coming up there. It's more than likely this could have been Lucian Foster. Again, I think he messed around with paper photography, but if you're a good businessman, paper photography wouldn't have made him much of anything back then. And people were not that interested in it, but it was cheaper. And people didn't have to sit there that long. And so you have, again, Willard Richards. I don't even think, he had a 5-year-old son in 1844. Here he is with his wife and his son. He doesn't even look 5. He looks so young, but here he is later on in life getting into daguerreotype. Because it was still seen as very fancy and expensive and just came out so clear. And of course, this is a daguerreotype. It's a paper photograph. I think Joseph Smith could have gone to Washington, D.C. He did in 1840. But I think this could be him. He would have gained weight because he lost, I think someone said 80 pounds. A ridiculous amount of weight because he was really just starved for the 6 months that he was in jail when he was in Liberty. It just almost killed all of them. They said it was a miracle there wasn't divine intervention, and if they didn't have the power of the priesthood, he says they would have just died from starvation and freezing to death because they didn't have blankets. They had an open window for months in the snow in the winter. So, but you lose all that weight, you lose muscle, metabolism is going to go down. And so I think that first year or two, he would have packed on the pounds. His metabolism would have been low. At the same time, they would have seen this skinny guy and overfed him. So you could see more plump cheeks. And then a few years later, get more muscular. He's literally carrying granite. 1844, the Nauvoo temple is not done, but he is helping to carry the granite to build that temple. And so he would have had a massive trapezius muscle, which is what you see there. And he's also working on a farm. And he's got quite a bit of muscle here, but he's just more plump, He looks like he's had quite a bit of sleep. He got to recover for a couple years before he got to experience a lot more stress of, plural marriage and all the crazy stuff that did happen in Nauvoo that I think would have stressed this, definitely did stress him out if you're reading the letters. He was also president of the church, mayor. His hairline would have receded a little bit. That's also possible. And it just matches the death mask anyway. So, but yeah, cool stuff about J.S. Bibbins. And I'll just conclude. He died in the same city and that Joseph Smith III and his brothers were living and running the church up until like 3 years before J.S. Bibbins died. Emma Smith knew J.S. Bibbins' father because he taught her. It was extremely influential that he's in her family history on the official website for her family and descendants. So all of this is just really supportive that this was found in a Smith family photo album, according to the guy that sold it to me. I'm the only person that has believed him up until last year. Now there are a few people that are like, oh, okay, all these historians in Utah just made fun of him and were really mean to him. And now a few of them are like, oh, well, okay. I think that's really why I got a lot of pushback, was because of that. But anyway, have a good day.